July 18th, 1943, 9:07 a.m., Camp Miles, Standish, Massachusetts. Dr. B.F. Skinner knelt beside a wooden box, his hand steady as he lifted a pigeon with iridescent gray feathers. The bird, tagged P-47, tilted its head, nuzzling his palm. Skinner placed P-47 into a metal compartment built into a model missile fuselage. Outside the lab, summer sunlight glinted off the missile's aluminum skin. Inside, a small screen displayed a blurred image of a battleship, P-47's target. Skinner closed the compartment door and flipped a switch. The screen lit up brighter. P-47 pecked at the screen, first left, then right, adjusting the missile's virtual course. A needle on a nearby gauge twitched, tracking the bird's movements. Skinner smiled. After 6 months of work, the pigeon was guiding the missile. But would the U.S. Army ever trust a bird to kill enemies? The story of America's pigeon-controlled missile begins in 1942, when the U.S. Army Air Forces faced a critical problem: precision bombing. By then, American bombers like the B-17 Flying Fortress were striking German and Japanese targets, but their accuracy was abysmal. From 20,000 feet, a bombardier might miss a factory by a mile or more. Cloud cover, anti-aircraft fire, and enemy fighters only made things worse. The USAF needed a way to guide bombs or missiles to their targets with greater precision, something that could work even when visibility was poor. Enter B.F. Skinner, a Harvard psychologist already famous for his work on operant conditioning, training animals to perform tasks through rewards. Skinner had spent years teaching pigeons to peck at targets for food pellets. In 1942, he had a radical idea. If pigeons could be trained to peck at images of enemy ships or buildings, they could guide a missile to its target. The concept was simple. A missile would carry 3 pigeons in a compartment near its nose. Each pigeon would look at a screen projecting the target below. When the target drifted off-center, the pigeons would peck at the screen. Their pecks would send electrical signals to the missile's control surfaces, adjusting its course. The 3 pigeons would act as a voting system. If 2 pecked left, the missile turned left, reducing the chance of error. Skinner pitched the idea to the USAF in October 1942. The reaction was mixed. Some officers dismissed it as absurd. How could a bird outperform a human bombardier? Others, desperate for a solution, saw potential. The USAF awarded Skinner a $25,000 grant, equivalent to $450,000 today, to build a prototype. He set up a lab at Camp Miles, Standish, a training base in Massachusetts, and hired a team of 6 assistants, animal trainers, electrical engineers, and machinists. They called the project Project Pigeon. The first challenge was building the missile's guidance compartment. Skinner's team designed a metal box 12 inches long, 8 inches wide, and 6 inches tall, just big enough for 3 pigeons. The front of the box had a convex lens that projected the ground below onto 3 small screens, one for each pigeon. Each screen was connected to a set of electrical contacts. When a pigeon pecked the screen, it closed the contact, sending a signal to a servo motor in the missile's tail. The motor adjusted the missile's rudders or elevators, correcting its course. The compartment also had a food dispenser that dropped a pellet every time a pigeon pecked correctly, reinforcing the behavior. Next came training the pigeons. Skinner's team started with 60 birds, all homing pigeons, chosen for their keen eyesight and ability to focus on tasks. The training began in a small room with projection screen. The team showed the pigeons black and white images of German battleships, Japanese airfields, and German factories, targets the use-off wanted to destroy. At first, the pigeons pecked randomly, but when the team gave a food pellet every time a pigeon pecked the center of the target, the birds learned quickly. Within 2 weeks, most pigeons could peck the target center 80% of the time. The team then moved to moving targets. They projected films of ships sailing or trains moving, simulating the missile's view as it approached. The pigeons adapted, pecking to keep the target centered on the screen. By March 1943, the best pigeons, including P-47, could track a moving target for 10 minutes straight, adjusting their pecks to compensate for the target's speed and direction. Skinner's notes, preserved in Harvard's archives, describe one test where P-47 maintained the target within 2% of the screen center for 12 consecutive minutes. With the pigeons trained, the team built a full-scale model missile to test the system. The missile was 12 feet long, 1 foot in diameter, and made of lightweight aluminum. It didn't carry explosives, just the pigeon compartment, a battery, and the servo motors. In April 1943, they conducted the first ground test at Camp Miles Standish. The missile was mounted on a rail, and a film of a Japanese aircraft carrier was projected onto the pigeon screens. When the team launched the missile by moving it along the rail, the pigeons pecked at the screen, guiding the missile to stay locked on the carrier. The test was a success. The missile stayed within 5 feet of the target path for the entire 200-yard run. Encouraged, Skinner's team prepared for a live flight test. In June 1943, they traveled to Eglin Field, Florida, a use-off base with a bombing range. They modified a surplus rocket, the M-8, to carry the pigeon compartment. The M-8 was 10 feet long, could reach 350 miles per hour, and had a range of 2 miles short, but enough for a test. The team loaded 3 pigeons, P-47, P-52, and P-61, into the compartment. The target was a wooden replica of a German U-boat bunker placed on the range. The launch took place on June 27, 1943. The M-8 rocket roared off the launch pad, trailing smoke. For 15 seconds, the pigeons' pecks were tracked by a radio signal sent from the rocket to the control tower. Then the signal cut out. The rocket crashed 500 yards from the target. Close, but not a direct hit. The team retrieved the pigeon compartment and found the birds unharmed. P-47 was even pecking at the screen, as if the test was still ongoing. Skinner analyzed the data and realized the problem. The rocket's vibration had jostled the screens, making the target blur. The pigeons had struggled to track it. The team modified the compartment, adding rubber padding to reduce vibration and a better lens to sharpen the image. They also trained the pigeons to tolerate louder noises and more movement. In July 1943, they conducted a second flight test. This time, the rocket flew 1.8 miles and crashed within 100 yards of the target. The USAF observers were impressed, but still skeptical. One officer, Colonel John Jack Adams, wrote in his report, "The pigeons show promise, but we need to see them guide a missile to a real target before we commit to production." Skinner's team pressed on, refining the system. They increased the missile's range by adding a small fuel tank, extending it to 5 miles. They also improved the pigeon compartment's ventilation, Earlier tests had shown the birds overheated during long flights. By August 1943, the system was reliable enough for a critical demonstration, a test with a live warhead. The USAF provided a 500-pound high-explosive bomb, and the team attached it to the modified M8 rocket. The target was an old destroyer anchored 3 miles off the coast of Eglin Field. The demonstration took place on August 15, 1943. Dozens of USAF officers watched from a bunker. Skinner loaded 3 top-performing pigeons, P-47, P-52, and P-61, into the compartment. The rocket launched at 10:15 a.m. For 30 seconds, the radio signal tracked the pigeon's pecks. Then, the rocket disappeared behind a cloud. When it emerged, it was locked on the destroyer. Seconds later, there was a flash of light and a loud explosion. The rocket had struck the destroyer's stern, blowing a hole in its hull. The destroyer began to sink. The officers cheered. Skinner later wrote, "In that moment, I thought we had won them over." But victory was short-lived. In September 1943, the USAF announced it was cutting funding for Project Pigeon. The reason? The development of radar-guided bombs. The USAF had been working on a system called Azon, a bomb with a radio-controlled tail fin that could be guided by a bombardier in AB-17. Azon was still in its early stages, but the USAF believed it had more potential than a pigeon-controlled missile. There were also political factors. Some generals thought relying on pigeons would make the U.S. military look ridiculous to allies and enemies alike. If you found this interesting, give a thumbs up to show your support. Drop a wonderful in the comments to let me know you're still with me. Stick around till the end, because I'll reveal 3 mind-blowing facts you won't want to miss. Haven't followed yet? Hit that follow button so you won't miss our next deep dive. Trust me, the best is yet to come. Skinner fought to save the project. He argued that the pigeon system was cheaper. Each pigeon cost $2 compared to $10,000 for an Azon guidance unit. More reliable, pigeons didn't fail due to radio interference, and easier to mass produce. He even offered to demonstrate the system to President Franklin D. Roosevelt, but the USAF refused. By November 1943, Project Pigeon was officially canceled. The team dismantled the lab at Camp Miles Standish, and the pigeons were donated to a local zoo. Skinner returned to Harvard, his dream of a pigeon-controlled missile dashed. But the project story doesn't end there. Declassified USAF documents, released in 1972, reveal that the military continued to study the pigeon system in secret. In 1944, as the war in Europe and the Pacific intensified, the USAF Precision Bombing Division reopened Project Pigeon on a smaller scale. They were frustrated with Azon performance. Radio interference from German jammers often rendered it useless. They wanted to see if the pigeon system could work in combat. Skinner was invited back to lead the revived project. He assembled a new team and set up a lab at Eglin Field. This time, the focus was on a larger missile, the JB-2, a copy of Germany's V-1 buzz bomb. The JB-2 was 25 feet long, could reach 400 miles per hour, and had a range of 150 miles, enough to strike targets in Germany or Japan from Allied bases. The team modified the JB-2's nose to carry 6 pigeons, up from 3, for better accuracy, and upgraded the guidance system to handle the missile's faster speed. Training the pigeons for the JB-2 was more challenging. The missile's vibration was stronger than the M8's, and the screen had to display targets from a much higher altitude. The team built a simulator that mimicked the JB-2's flight, rocking the pigeon compartment and projecting images of targets from 10,000 feet. The pigeons adapted, but it took longer. By March 1944, only 10 to 50 trained pigeons could track targets consistently. The first test of the Pigeon-Controlled JB-2 took place on April 10, 1944. The target was a German tank factory replica in the Eglin Field Range. The JB-2 launched at dawn, and the pigeons' pecks were tracked by a radio link. For 90 seconds, the missile stayed locked on the factory. Then, the radio signal was jammed, simulating German interference. To the team's surprise, the pigeons continued to peck, guiding the missile back on course when the jamming stopped. The JB-2 struck the factory replica, destroying it. The Precision Bombing Division was impressed, but again, politics intervened. The U.S. Navy had begun testing its own guided missile, the BAT, a radar-guided glide bomb, and the USAF didn't want to compete with another branch of the military. Project Pigeon was canceled for a second time in June 1944. Skinner was devastated. He later wrote in his memoir, "We had a weapon that worked, cheaper, more reliable, and more resistant to jamming than any other guided system. But the military was too focused on modern technology to see its value." He returned to Harvard, where he continued his work on psychology, eventually becoming one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century. He never spoke publicly about Project Pigeon again until the 1960s, when declassified documents forced the military to acknowledge its existence. The pigeons of Project Pigeon were mostly forgotten. Some were released into the wild. Others were used for other military projects, like carrying messages between troops. P-47, the first pigeon to guide a missile, was kept at the Eglin Field Zoo until its death in 1947. It was stuffed and displayed in the base's museum, though the label called it a message pigeon, omitting its role in the missile project. The technological legacy of Project Pigeon is more significant than many realize. The system's core idea, using a biological organism to guide a weapon, paved the way for modern precision guidance systems. The voting system of multiple pigeons influenced the design of redundant computer systems in missiles, which use multiple processors to reduce error. The pigeon compartment's vibration dampening technology was adapted for use in early radar systems, which also struggle with vibration, and Skinner's training methods, using positive reinforcement to teach complex tasks, became standard in the training of animals for military and civilian purposes, from bomb-sniffing dogs to lab rats. The project also raised important questions about the ethics of using animals in warfare. Skinner argued that the pigeons suffered no harm. They were well-fed, housed in comfortable compartments, and never exposed to actual combat. But critics pointed out that the pigeons were being used to kill, even if indirectly. The debate continues today, with animal rights groups opposing the use of animals in weapons testing, and the military defending it as a necessary part of developing life-saving technology. In the decades after World War II, Project Pigeon became a footnote in military history, dismissed as a quirky experiment rather than a serious weapon. But in recent years, historians have rediscovered its significance. It was one of the first attempts to create a smart weapon, a weapon that can adapt to changing conditions mid-flight. It was also a reminder that innovation often comes from unexpected places. A psychologist, not an engineer, had solved a problem that stumped the military's top scientists. Today, only a few artifacts from Project Pigeon survive. The stuffed body of P-47 is still on display at Eglin Air Force Base's museum, though the label now acknowledges its role in the missile project. Skinner's original lab notes are stored in Harvard's Widener Library, available to researchers, and a model of the Pigeon-Controlled JB-2 missile is part of an exhibit on World War II technology at the Smithsonian Institution's National Air and Space Museum. These artifacts are not just curiosities. They are reminders of a time when the U.S. military was willing to try anything to win the war. The story of America's pigeon-controlled missile is a strange one, but it is also a story of innovation, persistence, and the limits of military bureaucracy. Skinner and his team created a weapon that worked, one that could save the lives of American bombers by reducing the need for risky low-altitude raids. But the military's obsession with modern technology, radar, radio control, doomed the project. In the end, the pigeons were too old-fashioned for a military that wanted to embrace the future. But the future, as it turned out, owed a debt to those pigeons. The precision guidance systems that guide today's cruise missiles and drones, systems that can hit a target the size of a car from 1,000 miles away, owe their origins to Skinner's idea of using a simple peck to adjust a missile's course. The pigeons of Project Pigeon may not have fought in the war, but they helped shape the weapons that would define warfare in the decades to come. On a summer day in 1943, P-47 the pigeon pecked at a screen, guiding a missile to its target. It was a small act, but it was a historic one. It proved that even the most unlikely creatures could play a role in winning a war. And it reminded us that innovation often comes from looking at old problems in new ways, even if that means putting a pigeon in a missile. The pigeon-controlled missile was never used in combat. It never killed an enemy. It never changed the course of World War II. But it did something else. It showed that the U.S. military was willing to think outside the box, to take risks, to try the impossible. And in war, that willingness to innovate, even if the innovation seems strange, is sometimes the most powerful weapon of all.